Our third and final topic, we've talked about actually a little bit more because I think it just naturally comes up. But as we all know, the ultimate goal to production, right? Let's get deployed to production. Now, organizations have a varied number of environments. We've worked with organizations where it was dev, QA, stage, prod, and then we've worked with organizations where it's like QA or Dev 1, Dev 2, Canary, QA, UAT pen, stage 1, stage 2, stage pen, and then production. And usually production was like multiple data centers. So that complexity, right, kind of all over the place depending on what you need. And we've had some customers too, where they'll have two environments. One's for, let's say, PCI, and one's for non-PCI.
Mm-hmm.
That's important because you got very restrictive things that you have to do there, right? Those compliance and regulations bring in things. So there's a lot of things that come into play when we think about, well, what's in an environment? Everybody's organization that we've worked with, it's some the same, but then a lot different as well, because it can change even within an organization to the applications they have to deploy. And different groups do it differently. So my question is this. Shouldn't production actually require the least amount of time and effort?
That's where the, it really depends on who you're asking that question to. Like if you're using like some sort of like business to consumer app, right? Like let's say we're the infamous TikTok, right? Like, does it really matter, at the end of the day, my dog jumping around listening to some sort of song? Is it like, if that feels, is that really important? Versus like, let's say I helped, I did some consulting for Bank of America, so I got to work in their check cashing app. $1 trillion passes through their application. Yes, the U.S. economy will come to a stop if they can't cash checks, right? So like, there's a little bit difference of where the question's going, but you really want that. You really want, so modern, let's say software development requires feedback, right? So you want to get that in a controlled, safe environment. You want that feedback to come quicker. The quicker you deploy, ironically, the quicker you're going to get feedback, right? And so getting the changes into the hands of your consumers, getting the changes in the hands of your users is critical, right? So there's lots that both organizations can learn. TikTok can learn from Bank of America, and Bank of America can learn from TikTok. Take away the, where the data is, but like, you can, they both can learn from each other, right? Like being, constant changes to like, they had one release in like 2.5 years, right? Like, so like that's usually, they both can learn. Making sure that both of their goals are valid. They want safety for the users, safety for the system. They want to ensure that there's widespread impact when they have it. And that's usually it. Like a lot of times, the biggest hurdle, I think, to deploying to production, I know I talked about this a little bit before, is what you do in a failure, right? Like, because if you could just revert back with no recourse, like for example, I'll give you an example. I like to fly, or when we're able to fly, so I book a lot of award tickets, but I'm Diamond with Delta, so I have no recourse in canceling a award ticket. Zero. I book tickets and cancel them all the time. If that was the case going into, your application, oh, you know what, it failed, revert. And if it took seconds, you would have no recourse. But unfortunately, software deployments, especially things involving data, there's definitely judgment calls and points of no return, and they take time, right? Like, you know what, if we deployed, to multiple nodes in production, like you're saying, that the customer with the prospect with multiple environments, that deployment, even though it was quick, it probably took a half an hour to propagate through dozens of servers. Right. You just can't turn around. There's items that are in flight. That what do you do with transactions that are going on? Like, there's like so many engineering level like thoughts, like how do we back this out if we had to? Like, backing things out can be extremely complicated. By some of my production, before there were outages, but now we call them incidents. A lot of planning would go ahead if we had to back out, and then executing that plan, like how do you test it, right? Like how do you test backing out? And so if there's that confidence, and this is why, again, shameless self-plug for Harness, like for most types of deployments, like we help you implement like a Canary deployment, or a blue-green, right? If you're unfamiliar with those terms, there are ways of incrementally deploying something and then moving forward or moving back if you don't like the results, or the results are regressive over the past results. So we do that by convention too. So It's really easy. Like giving people that type of confidence, I think is probably one of the biggest things that we do with that. Going back to if you had no recourse, well, go for gold every time. But
Yeah.
there's clearly lots of recourse to back stuff out, and we help facilitate that by convention.
Yeah, and I asked my question with a grin on my face, right? Shouldn't production take the least amount of time and effort, but also being serious and really hit the nail on the head of what I was going for, which is if it takes less time and it is takes the least amount of effort, there's that recovery piece. We deployed something and something's not working. Instead of all hands on deck, let's find a break fix. Wouldn't it be better if you could just hit revert and it goes back to what it was and then take the time to fix it? Because what I've seen a lot of times is there's a break fix that has to go in. Everybody, skips all the procedures. We'll deal with that later. They go and they branch off the code and they just fix that one thing. And a lot of times everybody's saying, look, if this causes other issues, we'll wait to see what those are. And as long as those issues aren't like, critical, it's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
The question is why, right? You're rushing to get something in, and by doing so, you're causing other issues that you're saying is acceptable, but that leads to technical debt. And so, again, kind of thinking about it, if you could roll forward into a new version and something goes wrong and you can go back, that means your deployments are automated in a way and you've set things up. Now right, as you and I know, that can be challenging because that's not just a deployment thing. You talked about, let's say, transactions in flight and some other things, depending on engineering wise, what changes you made. That being able to revert back also can come down to how is your service or applications actually engineered, even be able to support that. So there's that piece, but you hit something that I had in my notes that I wanted to make sure we hit on, which was blue, green, canary, and things like that. Which is for those that don't know, basically, let's say blue-green is you have kind of this parallel environment that I've got version 1 in and now I've got version 1.2 in, and I can redirect traffic a certain way so that as I can, let's say, do 10% to the 1.1 and I can do the rest over to 1.0 and I bleed traffic and I make sure that as things are okay, eventually I'll bleed all the new traffic to the new release and I'll get rid of the old release. But if there's ever an issue, all I do is switch traffic. And in a way, I'm reverting. And that's a way to be able to handle it. Now, again, always going to come down to application architecture and a lot of other things. But that goes back to, again, what's the maturity of the dev of your DevOps journey, of your CE process. So, a lot, again, what we've seen working with customers, what makes it really easy, honestly, is something like Harness, because it's very easy to build the deployment and say, all right, now add this step, and it's people say, well, if we've got this canary environment, we don't know how we're going to deploy, or if we're going to do blue green. Well, here, I got that. Here's your answer, right? Let's make it really easy and say, oh, okay, well, now let's go and do this. And again, with what we've seen working with customers, using Harness, is that we reduce that barrier to be able to get to that blue green, some of those other things, because it's kind of been solved for you. You basically tell Harness what you want to do, and it says, okay, I got you there, and people can go off. And I think that's what's important, is how quickly can you get up and running and do these sorts of things. And that's where, again, as we shift left and a lot of other things, that's where Harness has really come into play, because customers have made investments in all different types of tools and technologies, and Harness plugs into those things. And it's not something where you've got to rip out what you've invested in. You can kind of surgically slide it in and start to attach, and now it's just part of your environment. And quite honestly, it's I go back and forth. I wish back in the day I had something like Harness, because it just would have made deployments much easier, as opposed to this long document of things, or this script that you do what you can to be able to handle errors, but you can only handle but so much, and you can only think ahead of time but so much. So, Rob, anything else you can think of around that production piece that you've seen working with customers before we start to kind of wrap up here today?
No, I think it was well encapsulated. I think just last little like shimmer of harness there. Like as even the most conservative clients, you know, they want to leverage a canary deployment. But with harness, they can leverage it in any environment. So they're very confident that the canary will work, or they know what will happen in a failure situation. And like building it into your pipeline is like a matter. It's like it's trivial with harness, right? So you can enable that, you know, to go from QA to UAT, let's canary it. To go from UAT, so you're validating the canary actually the approach, and you can see what happens during a failure. So like testing some of the fringe use cases that you would only test during production, like you can, you know, kind of like conform that to earlier environments without much effort. So yeah, it's all about building confidence.
Great, which I think is really important at the end of the day. You want to have confidence in the deployment. You want to get up and running quickly. We talked about that. And you talked about, you know, developer freedom, being able to use maybe a newer version of a specific framework or use a new framework. Now, there's obviously a middle ground with that. You want to allow developers the freedom to be able to choose, but they need to be able to make smart choices. You know, we're partners with some other platforms that are out there that are part of that, which I know Harness plugs into. But again, everybody's a little bit different. And, you know, one of the big things too is that maturity. You talked about, we talked about testing, right? The amount of test coverage. When you first start your automation and everything, test coverage might be kind of low. Something is low, right? And over time, as you mature, as you iterate, as we talked about, test coverage goes up, iteration, or excuse me, not iteration, but automation to the different environments and to be able to handle more things. All of those things start to increase. I think the important thing is for an organization is to think about what's important, where do you want to start to save the time, and maybe you don't know. That's where we can help. We can assess and look at your pipeline. We do this quite often. We work again in conjunction with Harness. Look at what you're doing, identify some of the bottlenecks, and say, you know, if we shaved off, you know, time here, put in a little bit of effort here, you're going to save XYZ time here. Again, everybody's a little bit different, but it's starting somewhere and figuring it out, and then just slowly iterating over what's important, and just really kind of continuing to work through that. Just like we've talked about, Ravi, software isn't built, it's not a widget off a line and then it's done. It's this living and breathing thing. So is the CD process. It needs to be able to evolve and change right along with the application, because the application's needs may change, the business needs may change, infrastructure, security needs, all of those things may change. So the deployment has to be able to very quickly change with it, as opposed to being something that stops you from changing. Because again, changes at those various levels, individual groups are in charge of that. There's a reason they want to do that change, and it's always about improvement or some form of upgrade. And again, that's usually from some form of improvement, whatever that may be. So closing remarks, I want to say thank you for joining us today, and whenever you listen to this. And Ravi, really appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure being able to talk with you know, such a well-respected partner and an innovator in the field that's really got such a robust solution that's out there. So again, want to say thank you, everybody. And Ravi, I'll turn it over to you to say thanks to everybody before we wrap up here today.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me on. Yeah, if you ever want any more information about Harness, you can visit us at harness.io. Also, we have a community Slack and community discourse. If you want to interact with us directly, just head to community.harness.io. And so, yeah, thanks Josh for your time, and I really appreciate coming on.
Absolutely. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Ravi or reach out to us at Accelino. Our website is axcelino.io. There's a couple of ways to get in touch with us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Take care.